Welcome to the sequel. Welcome to that famously difficult second album. This might be Family Briefing number 26, but this right here, this is Family Briefing video number 2! For those of you with us last time, you'll see I haven't even changed my shirt. I've been so busy reading your emails and messages with feedback and ideas. Please keep sending them in. For those of you who haven't been with us before, this is the Family Early Years News Show. We'll be discussing every month the most important stories to have come out of the early years sector for the month. I won't prattle on any longer. Here is number 1. First up this month, we've got a really interesting story that came out of all places, Clark's shoe shop. This one seemed to capture a lot of attention this month. It's the government plans that they are intending to train thousands of workers at Clark's shoe shops to help children with speech, language and communication development. With pay beginning to stagnate in the sector, problems with underfunding, staff not necessarily feeling respected, I think a lot of people felt like this was the last story they needed to hear, that someone in a shoe shop could do the job of a highly skilled, experienced practitioner. On the one hand, that's one response. I think also a lot of people have said that maybe this is a good move, that we're trying to get language development into whatever we can. Really interested to hear what you have to say, so if you have any thoughts on this story, read below in the article and let us know what you think. We've also had the news from the government that they've announced that they'll be giving specialist training for health visitors in some of the most deprived areas of England on the same topic, trying to close that language gap. Another hot topic this month, potty training. There's been a big survey that's shown that 68% of staff report that children are being potty trained later and later over the last 5 years, and more of the responsibility is having to land at the early years workforce. Again, really interesting topic, would love to know what you think. Next up, we've got a story that we think is really important. This is the news that the reception baseline assessment pilot is due to go ahead in September. They've started to put out word for schools to join the pilot this month. And this is despite massive pressure from a number of campaign groups. More Than a Score, the campaign group, actually wrote an article on our website all about the problems with the reception baseline. They talk about how in the past we've tried and failed with the reception baseline. It doesn't actually add to teachers' knowledge of children, that the data is unreliable. There's lots of problems with the way they're approaching it, and in fact, to be honest, the very concept of it. If you are interested in learning more about it, please go and read that blog post. At the bottom of the blog post, there'll be a link to a petition that you can sign if you want to have your voice heard on this issue. There's other links in the article all about what the baseline's about and when the pilot's going to be going ahead. Story number 3, this is a huge report from government MPs all about the 30 hours. Now, they collected a load of experts, campaign groups, charities, people like the Alliance and the NDNA got involved, and it was all about trying to work out what was going on with 30 hours, and it makes for some interesting reading. They've said that 30 hours funding and the way in which the programme is currently being done is entrenching disadvantage, and that it's failing to address significant social injustices in children's life chances. This is all about the problem that with the underfunding, it's putting extra pressure on nurseries who are then increasing fees for younger children, that the children who most need free care are not able to access it, that there is a problem because disadvantaged 2-year-old places are not being taken up because nurseries simply can't afford to have them. They had 3 main recommendations that they reported: that the government should reform the 30 hours straight away and target the provision to disadvantaged children, that maintained nursery schools should be fully funded, more on that later on, and that the government should develop a comprehensive strategy to join up early years services, building on the success of children's centres. Super interesting report. If you've got the time to read it, it's not too long. You can read it on the government website, again, link down below. There's other, in the article that we've got, there's also lots of other stories around the 30 hours, including the news that the Health and Social Care Committee are pushing the government to produce a long-term strategy for the first 1,000 days of a child's life. It seems that there is growing pressure, whether it's in government, outside of government, to actually make a change about this. Good news on the outside. Let's hope that it comes through and the Treasury will open up their purse strings. Story number 4, and it's another really important topic. It's all about how the Early Years Alliance, previously the Preschool Learning Alliance, have announced a joint venture with the Department for Education and Ofsted to tackle mental health concerns in the early years. This follows the Alliance's Minds Matter survey that came out last year that had some pretty worrying results around mental health in early years, including that staff, 1 in 4, so 25% of staff were thinking about leaving the sector due to stress and mental health difficulties. To begin with, the partnership is just going to be about trying to gather as much information, surveys, focus groups. You'll find lots of information about how you can get involved. I think it seems like an early target is probably going to be the new Ofsted inspection framework, where they're looking at trying to reduce paperwork and heavy expectations on practitioners. Let's see how that comes out, but if you're interested in learning more about that Ofsted framework, we actually had an interview with Jill Jones a couple of months ago, which you can find on our website. Child development time. Here are all the stories that we thought were interesting this month about child development and psychology. The first one, newborn babies have an inbuilt ability to pick out words. This is a new study from the University of Liverpool that has shown that only 3 days old infants already start to have the key mechanisms to pick out words in a stream of sound. Super interesting on that kind of nature-nurture debate. We've also found from another study from Penn State that children actually inherit personal beliefs and morals from their genetics. Another interesting kind of wade into the nature versus nurture debate there from the Penn State study. A really interesting study from Aarhus University in Denmark has shown that being surrounded by green space in childhood can actually improve mental health in later life. Another super interesting study, 55% less risk of developing mental disorders when they become adults if they grow up in greener surroundings. Another tick box for the forest schools, that's for sure. Finally, there's another piece about how hearing 2 languages at home is not just allowing children to grow up bilingual, but actually improving the attention in babies. This is a study from York University who compared children who grew up in households with 2 languages compared to children that grew up in households with only 1. One thing we talked about earlier in the 30 Hours report was this consideration to make sure that we're properly funding maintained nursery schools in the UK. And this month there's been a lot of pressure, whether from MPs, from charities, explaining that if we don't do something about the big gap in funding that maintained nursery schools have now, then we're going to be looking at hundreds of closed nursery schools by the end of the year. As a result, Children's Minister Nadhim Zahawi has announced the stopgap funding of £24 million for the 2019 to 2020 school year. It's been an interesting response because on the one hand, it's something that campaigners have been saying is really important, and of course making sure that these thousands of nursery schools and these maintained nursery schools have the funding they need is super important. But it's also been an opportunity, I think, for a few key figures to come out and say this isn't enough. It's all well and good to look after these very important institutions, but when compared to the 24,000 private and voluntary sector nurseries that are struggling because of the 30 hours underfunding, it's really a drop in the ocean. Story number 7, it's another story about rising costs for both parents and providers. The main line that a lot of newspapers have gone after is this idea that going to nursery in inner London now is almost as expensive as going to university. This is from new figures released by the Coram Family and Childcare Trust. They calculated that it can cost an average of £9,100 a year for 25 hours of care a week in inner London, with, of course, the max annual tuition fees for universities being £9,250. At the same time, government-funded research has shown that nurseries are facing rising costs year on year for the last 3 years, over and above inflation. Again, I think one thing that was interesting, there was a great editorial in Nursery World this week from the editor of Nursery World explaining that maybe some of these things are just starting to pile up and we're seeing that perhaps the tide is shifting. So fingers crossed, with all this news, what we'll actually see is the government hopefully starting to listen and realise that they need to invest more money in the early years to solve this funding crisis. Because at the moment the costs are just being pushed onto the parents, and that those costs are rising and rising and rising. Story number 8, this is a quick one, just something to check out. The Ofsted have recently released some safeguarding advice, particularly for the online realm. It's all about how we safeguard children and adults online and our responsibilities in early years settings. So they cover what your responsibilities are, what your statutory responsibilities are, and then lots of ideas on how you can just be evidencing in your policies and procedures and in other ways that you're covering off those things. Again, links in the article, give it a read. Time for the business bit. There's not been many deals this month, but the few that have come through have been pretty big. Excuse my French here, but the first is about nursery chain La Maison Bleue, which is the biggest nursery group in France, have acquired their first UK setting, and it's quite large. It's the 9-setting Old Station Nursery Group. I've read a few interviews with the founder of La Maison Bleue, and he said that he's expecting to make a lot more acquisitions over the next few months. So we could see a really big player coming into the nursery scene here in the UK. A couple of other stories, Just Childcare has bought their 50th nursery, and Bright Horizons have acquired My Family Care, which also has the Tiny's childcare franchises, a bunch of nanny and child-minding franchises throughout the UK. Quite a big story there again, Bright Horizons just continuing their growth. Finally, we've got the last stories of the news today, and we start with the sad news that the founder of the Preschool Learning Alliance, Bel Tutev, has sadly died. Bel first set up the Alliance, now known of course as the Early Years Alliance, in 1961, after challenging the government to establish more nursery schools and play centres for children under 5. A very inspiring woman indeed. Next story, and I think this is something that Bel would have loved. It's a brilliant video that we found on Facebook from Lego, which talked about the creativity of 4 and 5-year-olds. They made some challenges around creativity and got 4 and 5-year-olds to compete against adults to see who could be more creative. I think you probably know already the answer, but great video to go and check out. We've also got the news that the world's tiniest baby was finally left at Tokyo Hospital. He was born 5 months ago at just 268 grams, if you can believe it. When he was born at 24 weeks, so a really inspiring story there. And finally, we've got the announcement of the Nursery Recognition Awards. Lots of winners across different regions in the UK, with Evolution Childcare taking home the big prize of the best nursery group.